Among the stars, far beyond the veil of what humanity once thought unreachable, existed a place where strength was not whispered but shouted through devastation, the Galactic Coliseum of Arms. It was not merely a place, but a symbol, etched in the annals of every advanced species as the proving ground of superiority. Technologies collided, ideologies clashed, and honor was determined by the efficiency of destruction. Here, the elite came to display their most advanced tools of war, each weapon an embodiment of a civilization's might, science, and pride. The Trekner entered wielding plasma-tipped sickles that tore matter at the molecular level. The Zonth showcased their gravity hammers, each swing capable of creating micro-black holes. Even the MYRN, typically peaceful, demonstrated disintegration lashes composed of magnetized quark strands. Every competitor had moved beyond physical projectiles centuries ago, considering them crude relics of an undeveloped past. Precision was now digital. Destruction, clinical. War had evolved into a cold equation, calculated down to the femtosecond. Then came the humans. Their transport ship, modest and unadorned, docked without ceremony. No thunderous entry, no glowing hull. Their attire lacked the gleam of exo-armor or neural sync suits. What they brought instead drew audible amusement: polished wood, carbon fiber limbs, and strings drawn taut by hand. A bow. An arrow. A joke. Among the spectators, military leaders, war strategists, and scientists, laughter rippled like static through neural relay feeds. The Trekner warlord Gorthake sneered openly, his scales rippling with the vibration of contempt. "Did Earth exhaust its technologies en route?" he quipped, his voice booming through the Coliseum's broadcast relays. The joke was echoed in over 47 languages simultaneously. The humans remained still. No rebuttal, no explanation. Their lead representative, a figure named Lien Vas, simply acknowledged the mockery with a nod. Calm, neutral. Indifferent to the ridicule. That silence unsettled some. But most interpreted it as admission of inadequacy. Each civilization present had risen through an age of weaponry evolved past basic projectiles, and left behind traditional warfare centuries ago. The idea that humanity still clung to string-drawn mechanics was absurd. It wasn't defiance, it was delusion, they believed. One MYRN delegate remarked. "It's like bringing a flute to a sonic war." They all agreed, humans had arrived to lose beautifully, if nothing else. What they didn't understand, what no one bothered to consider, was the human perspective. Where others saw tools, humans saw history. Where others measured efficiency, humans measured potential. The bow was not chosen because humanity lacked plasma rifles or kinetic disruptors. They had those. But here, in this place where civilizations competed not just in firepower but in identity, humans chose the one thing no other species would expect. Not because it was old, but because it had never reached its limit. This wasn't nostalgia. It was strategy. The Galactic Coliseum had never seen war as metaphor. Humans did. For them, conflict wasn't just a contest of force. It was expression of precision, discipline, and resolve. The bow had once turned the tide of Earth's great wars, ended dynasties, and equalized peasants and kings. Its value wasn't in power alone, but in the mastery required to wield it. And mastery, in the hands of humans, had a tendency to evolve. That evolution, hidden in plain sight, was what no species present grasped. Still, the sentiment across the arena remained unified. They saw wooden bows and arrows, and heard laughter. Humans, after all, were the youngest of the interstellar civilizations. Their invitation had been ceremonial, not serious. The Colosseum permitted each species one demonstration entry. Earth's choice was made. The ceremony would proceed. The outcome, they believed, was already written. What they didn't realize was that every laugh, every sneer, every dismissal, had been anticipated. Planned for. Welcomed. Lien Vas stood silent on the platform, bows slung casually across their back, a quiver of glistening arrows resting at their hip. Nothing about them screamed innovation. There were no visible augmentations, no HUD interfaces scanning the arena. Just a person. Just a bow. Just stillness. But behind that stillness, in the depths of Earth's arcane sciences, something extraordinary had been born. Something the Colosseum had never seen. A weapon not built to overwhelm defenses, but to ignore them entirely. Not designed to incinerate, but to slip through time and space like a whisper between dimensions. And yet, as the moment drew closer, as Lien stepped into the center of the proving circle, the crowd's attention remained light. Spectators prepared themselves for a cultural performance, not a competition. They expected symbolism, not science. A final laugh before the real displays began. They didn't know that in less than a minute, the mockery would stop. That what they thought was a gesture of humility was a surgical challenge. That the arrow resting beside Lien's fingers didn't fly through air, it flew through reality. And in that moment before the bowstring was drawn, humanity didn't appear triumphant, or even prepared. They appeared irrelevant. But only for a moment. It began as an obsession. Not with archery itself, but with the question, how far could a simple projectile go if nothing, no resistance, no inertia, no time, stood in its way? While other civilizations invested in AI-controlled weapon systems and ship-mounted annihilation beams, a small group of human physicists, engineers, and military tacticians returned to a concept deemed obsolete. The bow. Specifically, what the bow could become if pushed to its absolute limit in a universe where relativity could be bent. Initial breakthroughs didn't involve warfare at all. Deep space engineers testing gravitational lensing to transmit materials across short stellar distances stumbled upon an anomaly. A metallic shard, accelerated by a compressed tension relay and released through a stabilized field coil, vanished mid-trajectory and reappeared 4 meters away, instantaneously. The incident was dismissed as a glitch in sensor logging, until it happened again. And again. The realization struck, they hadn't lost the object, it had displaced through local spacetime by sidestepping conventional movement. From that point, Earth's labs pivoted. The standard arrow, once bound by aerodynamics, was now being rebuilt from the subatomic level. Shafts made from layered graphene-laced alloys could survive distortive acceleration. Fletching evolved into microvector fins with reactive stabilization, programmed not to fly straight but to compensate for the ever-changing turbulence within folded spacetime. The bow itself became less a weapon and more an energy delivery system. Its limbs, constructed from memory-flex carbon interwoven with superconductive threads, stored kinetic potential that could be released in a nonlinear burst. The string? No longer a strand of fiber, but a tension-locked nanofilm capable of translating physical motion into directional phase compression. These weren't upgrades. They were transformations. At full draw, the bow didn't just launch an arrow, it tore open a calculated seam in the surrounding dimensions and allowed the arrow to fall through it, bypassing traditional space entirely. The projectile didn't break light speed in the classical sense. Instead, it briefly occupied a state where it wasn't subject to speed limits at all. It moved without traversing. Other civilizations had experimented with similar technologies, quantum tunneling, teleportation, even phase cannons. But all of them ran into a wall, control. Their weapons dispersed energy too broadly, destabilizing during transition. Humans took the opposite approach. Instead of force, they chose precision. Instead of mass targeting, they used single-point delivery. It wasn't about annihilation. It was about threading a needle through existence. The targeting system was not digital. No tracking modules, no HUD overlays. Human archers trained to predict enemy vectors using raw physics, instinct, and honed perception. They didn't rely on calculations, they embodied them. Each archer's neural profile was mapped to sync with subtle environmental readings, allowing micro-adjustments mid-draw without technological intervention. The result wasn't accuracy. It was inevitability. The arrows were designed with internal phase stabilizers, no larger than a molecule, which held them intact during FTL displacement. On impact, they didn't explode. They inverted entropy briefly, creating localized collapses, enough to rupture shielded cores, disrupt energy matrices, or disable advanced armor systems without collateral damage. This was surgical warfare, delivered with elegance. The military applications became apparent too late for the rest of the galaxy to anticipate. By the time alien analysts uncovered performance data, humanity had already perfected delivery at ranges previously considered impossible for line-of-sight combat. They demonstrated one such shot by hitting a drone positioned behind a rotating asteroid field. The arrow's path could not be tracked. There was no visible trail, no residual energy. One frame it wasn't there. The next, it struck center mass. Power wasn't the point. Speed wasn't the obsession. Control was everything. Human archery, once the tool of primitive survival, had become a means of defeating threats before they even registered in detection arrays. It was quiet, clean, and untraceable. To the rest of the galaxy, these weapons appeared anachronistic, absurd in their simplicity. That misjudgment was precisely what made them so effective. No one feared what they did not understand, and no one expected a wooden frame and string to challenge energy weapon supremacy. But human bows no longer adhered to the limitations of ancient mechanics. They were refined instruments shaped by quantum foresight and relentless human will. What made it work wasn't just technology, it was the philosophy behind it. While others chased brute dominance, humans focused on optimizing what already existed. Instead of discarding the past, they repurposed it. They asked not what the bow was meant to do, but what it could do when reimagined by a species that refused to let go of an idea just because it was old. That mentality wasn't just innovation. It was defiance. A quiet, unspoken rebellion against the notion that progress had only one path. By the time the Galactic Coliseum learned of Earth's advancement, it was already too late to prepare countermeasures. No shield, no predictive AI, no multispectral field could anticipate what moved without warning and struck with absolute intent. The arrow did not follow a curve. It defined its own route. And in doing so, it redefined what a weapon could be. The demonstration arena was full, every seat occupied by delegates, tacticians, and warriors from dozens of advanced civilizations. Each species had already displayed its strength: blades that bent energy, minds that adjusted to thought patterns, armor that could redirect meteor-class impacts. Then came the humans, stepping forward for their presentation. The murmurs returned the moment Lien Vos appeared with a bow. Their presence no longer provoked laughter, only mild amusement. Curiosity, perhaps, from a few observant figures, but mostly dismissal. The general belief remained unchanged: humanity was indulging in spectacle, not substance. No one expected performance. Then Gorth AK of the Trekner stood. As the undefeated warlord of 5 cycles, his reputation as both fighter and provocateur was known throughout the galaxy. He didn't speak immediately. He paced forward, turned to the humans, then gestured dramatically to his aides, who brought forth a photon sickle. It pulsed with radiant blue edges, capable of vaporizing reinforced alloy on contact. He activated it with a soundless flick. The weapon ignited, oscillating at a frequency that visibly bent the air around it. With deliberate intent, he hurled the sickle toward a distant training construct, an armored drone reinforced with field dampeners and reactive plating. The weapon sliced through it without resistance. The remains scattered in a molten line across the platform. It was fast, precise, and devastating. Gorth AK turned to the humans. "Now, Earth, show us how your toys perform." Lien didn't react to the tone. They stepped forward, selected a single arrow, and notched it silently. No words, no theatrics. Just draw, breath, release. The arrow was gone. Not seen. No trail, no shimmer, no sound. The target remained untouched. For nearly 3 seconds, the crowd waited. Then, without warning, the hilt of the photon sickle, which had remained embedded in a distant wall, split in two. Not just a fracture. A perfect horizontal cut, smooth, clean, molecular. The room fell quiet. Some whispered about drones or cloaking tech. Others accused illusion or tampering. Gorth AK approached the remains of his weapon, analyzed the break, then turned to the humans, eyes narrowed. "A delayed trick?" Lien's voice, calm and measured, responded. "No trick. Just physics, applied with purpose." An overseer attempted to reset the sequence. A new construct was prepared. This time, the Trekner launched 3 simultaneous drones, weaving through randomized patterns, each protected by electromagnetic barriers. Lien notched another arrow. A breath. Release. Again, nothing visible. The 3 drones continued their course, then one by one, dropped mid-flight. All systems dead. No explosions, no external damage. Upon examination, each drone bore a single puncture at its core, one through its gravity modulator, one through its power cell, and the third through its command relay. The strikes had occurred milliseconds apart. Perfectly timed. Impossible to predict? Silence gave way to disbelief. This wasn't coincidence. It was control. Each arrow had calculated not just the movement, but the intended failure point of the target. And done so with such precision that no technology could detect its entry. The Colosseum began recalibrating its expectations. For the first time, humanity wasn't seen as quaint. They were now unpredictable. Gorthake, refusing to be overshadowed, issued a personal challenge. Duel. You and me. No constructs. No delays. The officials hesitated. But the humans did not. Lien simply nodded. The rules were simple: first to disable, not kill. Gorthake prepared his energy gauntlet, capable of generating a wide-area pulse. Lien readied another arrow. At the signal, Gorthake lunged. His speed was immense, enhanced by servos and synthetic muscle fiber. He closed the distance in under a second. But the arrow was already gone. Gorthake stumbled mid-charge. He halted, confused. Nothing had hit him. But then, one by one, the locks on his gauntlet disengaged. Power nodes on his arm sparked. The emitter dimmed. His suit's stabilization field collapsed, and he dropped to one knee. No injury. No visible impact. But his offensive system was rendered useless. Every weak point disabled, not by brute force, but by surgical timing. There was no applause. Just stunned silence. The duel was over before most spectators understood it had begun. The overseer announced the result. Humanity's victory, confirmed. It wasn't the power of the arrow that unsettled the Colosseum. It was the realization that no one had seen it coming. Not even Gorthake. That moment changed the tone permanently. Delegates began requesting performance data. Analysts demanded simulations. Strategists, once mocking, now scribbled calculations. The humans remained silent. They hadn't come to convince anyone. They had simply demonstrated what they already knew: mastery mattered more than spectacle. That day, no one laughed. Because now they understood that whatever humanity had created, it didn't rely on force to win. It simply didn't miss. The war began 3 months after the demonstration. A breakaway faction from the Unified Kithar Council initiated strikes across the Outer Rim, targeting trade routes and deep space research stations. Allied worlds responded quickly, deploying fleets equipped with orbital cannons and pulse strike cruisers. Humanity was invited to assist, not as combatants, but as advisors and logistical support. The assumption was clear: Earth's military, while clever, wasn't suitable for frontline warfare. Initial deployments confirmed expectations. Trekner shock troops dominated ground encounters. Zarnt storm units neutralized outposts using sound-dampened fusion grenades. Human ships remained at the rear, offering navigation analysis and resupply. Their presence was appreciated, but not crucial. Then critical targets began failing. Enemy command ships, stationed well behind active zones, lost control. Communications blacked out. Detonation relays misfired. Upon inspection, central processing cores had been breached, not with explosives, but pinpoint destruction. No alarms were triggered. No projectiles were tracked. There were no survivors inside those control modules. Just clean entry wounds, perfectly circular, less than a centimeter wide. The Kithar coalition called it sabotage. Internal betrayal. But it kept happening. Mobile shield outposts would shut down seconds before impact. Bombers preparing launch sequences suffered equipment failure mid-ignition. Not one of these failures showed signs of conventional interference. By the time the Third Fleet lost an entire weapons array within a sealed bay, the Kither Command admitted an unknown force was acting against them. Their surveillance systems showed nothing. Their countermeasures detected nothing. Targets were falling with no trace of engagement. Earth's representatives said nothing. It was only weeks later that one high-ranking Trekner general, after witnessing a detonation neutralized 2 seconds before activation, confronted the human delegation. He didn't accuse. He requested, "Show us what you're doing." What he was shown was not a missile, or drone, or cyber protocol. It was a bow. And the archer assigned to the strike unit, Lien Voss. Their explanation was short. Each strike wasn't an act of brute force. It was a single shot, executed with precision timing, sent across light minutes of space, guided not by sensors, but trajectory math, gravitational drift models, and instinct refined through training. The targets were not selected for maximum damage. Each arrow was directed to sever a key function, one power conduit, one node, one actuator, making the rest of the system irrelevant. Arrows arrived before decisions were finalized, before defenses activated, before actions began. The Kither weren't being overwhelmed. They were being anticipated. The Trekner, skeptical, sent Lien on a controlled field test. A moving freighter was assigned as target, protected by shifting shields and decoys. Lien drew. Released. 1 minute passed. Then the freighter's forward stabilizer detached mid-flight, followed by a cascading energy failure. The vessel drifted into standby mode, untouched externally. Upon inspection, a small cylindrical shaft was found lodged in the central bracket. No signs of combustion, no radiation, no disruption field. From that point, ghost bow units were formally integrated. Small human squads, often solo, deployed across the theater with specialized equipment and tight communication relays. Their job wasn't to destroy. It was to interrupt. Delay. Disable. Demoralize. The Kither began to falter. Command orders failed to reach squadrons. Supply ships vanished mid-jump. Reactor cores deactivated with surgical consistency. Ghost bows didn't aim at soldiers, they ended intentions. Their arrows arrived silently, just before plans took shape. Attempts to replicate the technique failed. Alien tacticians tried synthetic bows, AI targeting, even quantum-synced prediction software. None succeeded. They lacked the core element, human adaptability. Machines couldn't improvise in real time. Other species couldn't train the instinctual response necessary to align space-time calculations with intuition. It wasn't just about the tool, it was about the person behind it. Lien Voss became known across command networks not for their rank, but for outcomes. Where they deployed, the battle didn't escalate. It ended. One strike, one correction, and the momentum shifted. Not through firepower, but through removal of certainty. On the 7th major engagement, a Kither dreadnought initiated a sun-collapse bomb intended to destroy a triplanetary system. Countdown sequences were secure, isolated, encrypted. Defenders scrambled to evacuate, knowing interception was impossible. Then the countdown halted at 7. Diagnostics showed a circuit fracture, not from inside, but from something that hadn't passed through security. An arrow was found buried within the control node, its mass barely registering. No alarms had sounded. That was the moment the war changed. Kither forces stopped broadcasting commands. They reverted to manual operation. They fragmented fleets into isolated cells, believing decentralization would prevent targeting. It didn't help. Arrows still found the moments that mattered. By the end of the campaign, the Ghost bows had recorded 117 confirmed halts, 42 disarmaments, and 0 casualties. They had never fired more than 1 arrow per mission. They had never been seen by the enemy. No one called it magic anymore. They called it the correction point. The one action that, applied early enough, prevented entire disasters. Humanity didn't bring the biggest guns. They brought decisions that arrived before violence. And in the silence after each arrow, the battlefield reset. The war ended without a treaty. The Kithar surrendered by silence. Communication ceased, fleets powered down, and territories were abandoned without negotiation. No conditions were offered. There was no ceremony. The final act of resistance died not in battle, but in hesitation. Fear had replaced strategy. Every command was second-guessed, every order paused, haunted by the thought that somewhere, an unseen arrow was already in motion. After the conflict, reconstruction began swiftly. Allied systems reinstated governance. Trade lines resumed. Diplomatic ties were reforged. But one symbol remained above all else, an unfamiliar figure now etched into memory, the bow. Across dozens of Allied planets, statues were raised, not of warriors with blades or generals with medals, but of archers standing still, bow lowered, gaze steady. It was not celebration. It was acknowledgement. On Elton Prime, the largest of these monuments bore a single engraving. They struck only once. But they never missed. There were no names listed. The ghost bows remained uncredited by choice. For them, the war had never been about recognition. It had been about prevention. Every shot fired had been a final option, not a first one. Alien academies began requesting training frameworks. They sought schematics, algorithms, instruction. Earth declined. The bow could not be taught through replication. The arrows had never been about hardware, they were decisions, delivered with intent. That level of clarity couldn't be manufactured. Lien Voss retired quietly. No records revealed their location. Rumors suggested a remote station beyond Saturn, a quiet orbit where time passed slowly and stars moved uninterrupted. From that point forward, Earth declined further military integration offers. Humanity had proved its point, and saw no need to repeat it. The galaxy, however, had changed permanently. Doctrines were rewritten. Commanders revised definitions of precision and lethality. For the first time, systems allocated resources not to shielding or countermeasures, but to timing analysis and scenario anticipation. The concept of interception evolved. Speed was no longer the sole advantage. Anticipation had surpassed it. In training halls across the Milky Way, instructors pointed to footage, not of explosions, but of objects pausing in space just before collapse. Moments corrected by a nearly invisible force. Cadets studied not how to attack faster, but how to think earlier. What disturbed many wasn't the arrow. It was the silence that followed. No warning, no energy surge, no echo. Just absence. A precise void left where chaos had been certain. Not destruction, but interruption. That absence became a new metric. Allied databases began labeling avoided crises as silent halts, each tagged with a timestamp and probability curve. Over time, they grew more frequent. Entire battlefields de-escalated at the suggestion of a ghostbow's presence. No one asked how many humans could do it. Estimates varied, some said a dozen, others believed only one. But it didn't matter. The belief was enough. The threat no longer needed demonstration. Its legend did the work. Across diplomatic summits, leaders quoted Earth's restraint more than its tactics. For a species known for warlike history, their greatest weapon had been discipline. They had shown they could end conflict not with overwhelming force, but with targeted stillness. Not one ghost bow had ever fired a second time. That fact alone defined the doctrine. Some tried to replicate the psychological impact. Special forces trained to mimic the still posture, the unblinking focus. But none succeeded in replicating the essence. Because the humans hadn't merely aimed at targets, they had aimed at intention. They had studied chaos not to mirror it, but to interrupt it with minimal force. Centuries later, a historian would publish a collected archive of the war's turning points. The final entry included a visual, a single arrow embedded in a scorched panel of a decommissioned dreadnought. No fanfare. Just a timestamp. The caption read, "This was the last shot fired in the war." The image became a symbol for a new era. Military museums didn't glorify devastation. They highlighted prevention. Children were taught about the arrow not as a tool of violence, but as the boundary between conflict and choice. No one knew what became of the original ghost bows. Earth offered no answers. Their silence endured, just as effective as their presence. Perhaps that was the final lesson: power wasn't in action alone, but in the precision of knowing when it was truly necessary. In the end, humanity's victory wasn't in how far their arrows flew. It was in how close they stopped to the moment everything could have gone wrong, and chose not to let it.